This morning's speakers continue with this year's educational conference theme, Champions of Change, Blazing New Trails. Our next speakers will share more about a topic that has been a theme for PSW, storytelling. They will engage us in some inspiring discussions focused on using our story and how knowing our story can help in our trail to professional identity formation. Megan Grant is PSW's Director of Marketing, Communication, and Design. She graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Platteville with a Bachelor of Science in Media Studies with an emphasis in imaging media and a minor in public relations. Megan's work focuses on telling a story, evoking emotion, and crafting a visual and audio experience that makes members feel welcome and valued. Megan recently led the PSW board through an exercise similar to the one that will be presented today. Megan is joined by Karen Kopacek, an associate professor at the Pharmacy Practice and Translational Research Division at the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Pharmacy. She has been an associate dean for student affairs since 2012. Karen also serves as an adjunct professor for the physician assistant program in the School of Medicine and Public Health, where she provides pharmacology lectures to first-year students. Karen completed a bachelor's degree in pharmacy from the University of Iowa College of Pharmacy and a master's degree of educational leadership and policy analysis through the UW-Madison School of Education. She also maintains a clinical practice with the 4 cardiac rehab programs where she educates patients and staff about medications and moonlights as an acute care pharmacist at Fort Healthcare. She is currently serving on a national task force to initiate conversations within the profession regarding the professional identity formation, known as PIF, and to advocate for incorporating PIF into pharmacy education, training, and practice. Please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Good morning, everybody. As many of you might know, normally I'm not standing up at the podium. I'm normally back in the back or talking to exhibitors or helping people figure out how to get the app on their phone. But today I'm speaking, and I will be honest with you, I'm very nervous, but I'm so excited to share the stage today with Karen to talk about professional identity formation and storytelling. So welcome to Champions of Change. Make your story, own your story, and tell your story. We have no financial disclosures to report. And today's learning objectives. So for pharmacists, student pharmacists, and pharmacy technicians, you will be able to recognize and articulate your individual and professional identities, describe key individuals and experiences that impact professional identity formation, identify key elements in developing storytelling skills, recognize the power of storytelling and professional identity formation, summarize the key ways PSW can support and promote your professional identity formation, and list methods to promote storytelling activities at your practice site. Today, we are going to be defining what professional identity is and how to use storytelling to communicate it to others. Your professional identity is your foundation, the root of your story. And then who you are as an individual, who you are in relation to others, and who you are within your profession. The second part of this presentation will explore the use of storytelling to communicate your story to others. At this time, I'm going to ask Karen to come up and talk to us about professional identity formation.
Thank you, Megan, and good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. So we're going to work on that good morning again because it was not sounding very positive. So good morning. Much better. So what I'd like to do is take a moment for you to greet the folks at your table. What I'd like you to do, you may be sitting with people you know, but maybe there's individuals you haven't met yet. So introduce yourself. Where are you from? And I want you to identify and share your role within the profession. So let's just take a few moments to greet our neighbors. All right. let's go ahead and bring the focus back. So I'm hearing some noise in the audience, and that's always a good thing when you're giving a podium presentation. As Janet mentioned, I currently serve on a national task force, and I've been on this task force, well, actually 2 task force over the last 3 years to help facilitate the incorporation of professional identity formation within the PharmD curriculum. But now we're at the stage where we want to go out and share and introduce what professional identity formation is to the practice of pharmacy. So PIF is described as a transformative process. Oops. Helps. Oh, you had transferred the slide over for me. I'm not even paying attention to the slides. So, whoo, all right, another cup of coffee is definitely going to be needed today. So let me start again. Professional identity formation, described as a transformative process of identifying and internalizing professional values, actions, and aspirations, leading the individual to feel like a member of the profession. So in essence, PIF leads a person to think, act, and feel like a professional. So before we begin our first activity, we want to provide a few definitions of the key components of PIF. Identification is a combination of cognitive and social processes that allow us to make sense of ourselves as individuals and as members of society. Or more simply put, identity is who we are and who we are seen to be. Identity formation is the dynamic process in which we develop a clear and unique view of ourselves and our identities. So our first learning objective in this session is for you to articulate who you are by identifying your professional and your personal identities. At each table is a copy of the bubble worksheet that you see on this slide. So first, what we want you to do is to start with your personal identities. Reflect on who you are and who others see you to be, and create a brief list. Now, those personal identities could be your roles: spouse, an adult child. You could be a parent, or in my case, a dog mom. They're 4-legged and they're just as much work as the 2-legged kind. It can also be your personal identities. Maybe you identify yourself as an extrovert. Maybe you identify yourself as being moral, an athlete. And then finally, we think about your social identities. What are the circles that you belong to? That can include things like your education, your religion, your ethnicity, and sexual orientation. Then we want you to focus on your professional identities. And if you need some help coming up with words to identify your professional identity, on the app is the professional identity word list. So that might be helpful as you think about that. When you have your 2 lists, now you need to start assigning identities to the bubbles. So each bubble is a personal or professional identity. Select the bubble size that helps to demonstrate how strongly that identity really resonates and relates to you. And you can label as many bubbles as you want, and you can add more if you want as well. So we're going to give you about 5 minutes to complete the activity. Now, I do want to acknowledge that several of the UW students and preceptors in the room have completed this activity. So I want to make you honorary PIF champions to help facilitate the conversation about PIF at your tables. So let's go ahead and get started and work on your professional identity bubble activity. So now that you've identified some of your personal and your professional identities, and you've assigned them to bubbles on the worksheet, I want to share with you what mine looks like when I completed one when we did preceptor training here recently this spring. You can see that my personal identities are in blue, and there's several of them there. And my professional identities are in obviously olive green, since that's the color of pharmacy. Some of my circles are larger than others, and you can see some overlap with some of my roles. But now that I've made myself vulnerable and shared with you my identities, it's your turn to share your identities at your table. So let's take about 5 minutes for folks to share the identities that you're comfortable with sharing. So during this time, I want you to take note of all the identical or very similar identities that we share. And let's also celebrate the unique identities that are being brought to our profession. So go ahead and share those identities with folks at your table. Sharing identities, we acknowledge can be very humbling and make you very vulnerable. So we appreciate the conversations and the sharing that's going on at the tables to help us appreciate who we are as a profession and to celebrate our individual members. I have to be very clear that professional identity is not the same as professionalism. Professionalism is defined as the shared norms, the attitudes, and the behaviors that members of a professional community express or display, allowing others to recognize them as part of a community. Teaching professionalism has been described as a cookie cutter approach in which schools and colleges try to make everyone look and behave in the same way. But in contrast, professional identity is when an individual internalizes the roles and responsibilities of the professional community, leading the individual to think, act, and feel like a member. PIF is not one size fits all, like professionalism, as it calls for the integration and the balance of both our professional and our personal identities. It is often our personal identities which undergo change during PIF, especially for students and minority healthcare professionals. A visual model of combining both your professional and personal identities is the double helix of DNA, in which both strands interact with each other to form a unique person. So each person's professional identity is going to be different as we're really entwining those different multiple personal and professional identities to form our own double helix. Now, many of us have experienced along our journey of professional identity, the professional strand can be very rigid at times. And for many, that personal strand has to bend and has to change to accommodate the culture of our profession. The stretching, the bending, and the weaving together of multiple identities does provide many benefits. So for example, studies have shown that professional identity builds confidence and enthusiasm, and it keeps professionals engaged within their community of practice. Your professional identity can guide different professional interactions that you have with members of the community, and it encourages reflection on professional development and helps you with goal setting. And then finally, a strong professional identity helps you to withstand daily stressors or provocative moments when we can go down a rabbit hole and develop imposter syndrome or maybe burnout. The pharmacists that survived the COVID pandemic were those who had strong professional identities. We weathered the storm, we came through it stronger because we had that professional identity and the connection to our profession. Many healthcare professionals have left their practice because of the pandemic. And part of it is because of not having that strong identity to continue to weather through that storm and remain connected to their community. There are a few important principles that I want you to keep in mind as you make your professional identity story. And the first is professional identity formation has no map. It's a journey that's going to be different for everyone. Number two, our identities are never fixed. And in fact, an individual can recreate their identities at any time when there's personal and professional changes, leading to an altered sense of self. Number three, PIF has no end. There's not a destination, it's a journey. Number four, part of the struggle of PIF is that we have no universal identity for pharmacy to target. The pharmacy profession, as we know, has well over 600 different career paths for pharmacists, where each community of practice can have its own set of expectations, norms, and values for members to internalize. As you can see here on a slide, this is a representation of the PIF process. It is representing that individual transition of your personal identities and weaving with it your professional identities on the other side. So an important principle to remember is that PIF is social and that it's guided by others. Socialization, as you see in the slide, can be substituted with professionalization. So as we think about healthcare professionals, this is a dynamic, lifelong, and educational process that's formed through formal and informal interactions, experiences, and relationships with other members of that community. And then finally, socialization or professionalization is influenced by engagement that helps us to feel like a member of the community. It includes workplace and for students, classroom experiences. It's achieving professional milestones and developing resilience after a provocative or a challenging moment. This process is also influenced by feedback from others, self-reflection of ourselves, and learning how others view us as individuals and as members of the community. PIF can be enhanced or it can be harmed by positive and negative influences. Now, I highlighted several of the more key positive influences on the previous slide. You can see that it's about professionalization, reaching milestones and following traditions, experiences and relationships, having role models, receiving formative feedback, self-reflection, and developing resilience. But our PIF journey can actually hit some speed bumps and some roadblocks in the form of negative influences. Dissonance is when an individual's views, values, expectations, and identities are not congruent with what they're observing or experiencing. An example is during clerkships when students may experience dissonance as they learn about the hidden curriculum. We've all experienced that before. The hidden curriculum is the learning that occurs outside the formal educational setting, and it's influenced by customs, rituals, and commonly held understandings of the organization or professional culture. It may affect student learning by creating a cognitive dissonance between what is actually taught in the classroom and the practicality of working in healthcare. So without clear reflection opportunities and mentorship by members of that community, students are going to struggle with reconciling these differences. Another negative influence is the lack of engagement. That includes a member of the profession not belonging to a state or national organization to remain connected and be up to date with the changes that are ongoing. Maybe not attending a professional meeting such as PSW meeting and making connections with other members of the community. A weak identity as a pharmacy professional may make an individual more vulnerable to the things we talked about, like imposter syndrome and burnout. And then finally, as pharmacists, our professional identities have evolved over time, and I've been doing this for more than 30 years and seen significant change along the way. And instead of having one universal identity, we've added new identities on top of the old ones. We've created new communities of practice within pharmacy. And where actually many of us are active members of interdisciplinary communities that is based on our area of practice. So having these multiple identities and communities of practice rather than a universal identity makes it challenging and confusing for patients, other healthcare professionals, payers, and the public to have a view of what a pharmacist is and does. So now that you've warmed up with sharing your identities and we've discussed what PIF is, we now want you to discuss the following questions on this slide at your table to own your story. We want you to talk about examples of individuals who influenced your professional growth. What are the milestones that helped you feel like a member of the profession? What are the activities that make you feel validated as you fill in the blank? It could be as a technician, a student pharmacist, a supervisor, a director. Again, you figure out what it is, that identity and the example that helped you feel validated. Also focus on some of the negative influences. What are the provocative moments or experiences that made you question your professional identity? We're going to give you 10 minutes to have this discussion and share both positive and negative influences with the folks at your table. So let's come back. And now what we want to do is we're asking for some volunteers who would be willing to tell their story. So we've got a couple of microphones here in the middle of the auditorium here, the ballroom, and we're hoping that we have some volunteers who would come up and share how you answered one of these questions. And I'm happy to make myself vulnerable and start by sharing one of my stories. So I want to talk about a milestone where I actually felt like a pharmacist for the first time. Any of those of you in the audience, if you got licensed a long time ago and remember that your license exams was a 2-day process, it was a paper exam and you had to wait for 8 weeks or so before you got the letter in the mail. Some of you remember that. You youngsters, you don't know the grief. Boy, anxiously waiting for that letter to arrive, right? And it wasn't getting the letter that made me feel like a pharmacist. The time that I first felt like a pharmacist was my first solo shift. I was flying solo for the first time with no safety net. That's when I first felt like a pharmacist. And why? It wasn't that I am now licensed and I have the title and I can introduce myself as the pharmacist. It was being able to answer questions and to fix problems and to make recommendations on my own. And surviving that first shift built my confidence to be able to take on the multiple identities and roles that I've developed over the years. So that is one of my moments when I felt like a pharmacist. So is there anyone in the audience willing to share your answers to one of these questions to start telling your story? And I'll just preface it by the fact that I am a faculty member and I'm very comfortable with the pregnant pause. So I can stand up here and sweat in the spotlight for as long as it takes. All right.
Hi, my name is Charlie Lee. And I can definitely relate to that exam process of the 2 days, in addition to taking that class. We had a wet lab that day. And also the day afterwards was the law exam. So it was 2 days of the most nerve-wracking year. So I want to answer who was influential to my professional growth. When I think about when I was a student and also as a young pharmacist, I think about 2 individuals, Brenda and Mark Jacobs. And Brenda was my preceptor when I was a student, and she continues to kind of be a little bit of my guidepost to this very day as my mentor. What really was the impact on myself was Brenda's ability to talk to people, and I watched her as she did consultations, and that really truly influenced the way that I speak to people today when I talk to them about medications. Was a lot due to her. The other half I thought was very important was her ability to teach and educate. And because of my experience with her, the first thing I did when I came out and became a young pharmacist, I remember approaching the School of Pharmacy and asking the question, hey, what does it take to become a preceptor? And after I had my first student, what was very validating was that at the time she was really looking at a path towards a hospital pharmacy. But I thought she told me the most interesting thing. After my rotation here, you really got me thinking about going into community practice. So, I think about that story more as the kind of impact that I can have, on students. And since then, it's just really been a big passion of mine. I really love working with students because guess what? Every student that's in this room, you represent the future of pharmacy. That is it. And the best way for you to continue the fine tradition of Wisconsin pharmacy is to be paired up, with preceptors and mentors across the state that share the same passion, and share the same stories. So that when you become pharmacists, that's the thing that you want to do too, is to continue that fine tradition. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Charlie. Do we have another volunteer?
Hi, I'm Becca Burnett, and I'm actually going to talk about a provocative moment that made me question my professional identity. Just for the past couple of years, I've been in a formal Big L leader position, and it's a challenging transition to make, even if you've served in little L leadership positions in the past, even if you've been in formal leadership positions as a learner. The first time you enter that formal leadership position within your profession, there's huge challenges. And one of the ones I have struggled with is having difficult conversations with employees. I hate conflict, very conflict averse. And I also tend to steer towards things that come naturally to me. And I think this is natural for all of us. We cater to our own strengths. And so coming into a position where I'm not skilled at dealing with conflict and having those difficult conversations and being very direct and standing my ground on that, it made me question initially when I had those first conversations, am I the right person for this job? But I think thinking through that, it made me realize, in talking to peers, talking to trusted family members about it, it made me realize I just need more practice. I need to find what's my way to approach this situation. It might not be the same way that a different supervisor or manager would approach it, but maybe that means I bring a different benefit to that employee. I can approach the conversation in a different way and collaborate with them to help us get through this challenging situation.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you for volunteering and making yourself vulnerable and sharing your story. I think that as you sat at that table, you probably were hearing some very similar identities and very similar stories. And I think it's important, as Charlie mentioned, the next generation is following in our footsteps, and we need to help to support that, whether it be the new technicians that we hire coming into the pharmacy and helping them to develop their identities and be successful. The students who are in our training programs, so becoming a new leader. So we serve as mentors, and we serve as learners as well. And so those are two important identities within our profession. So I want to wrap up. What makes PIF uncomfortable is that it requires self-reflection. And in order to share your professional identity story with others, you need to be able to describe your own values, your internal standards, and your experiences. It requires you to identify those relationships that have identified your journey and understand the impact that they've made. The practice of storytelling does support your PI journey. Telling your professional story helps you to better understand and appreciate yourself. It helps to recognize what shaped your professional identity, and it allows for personal and professional change to happen. So thank you for participating in our activities today. They were designed to help you begin to create your professional identity story and practice telling it to others. I welcome Megan back to the podium to continue our discussion on developing your story.
Thank you, Karen. So now that you all have a really good sense of self, of professional identity, of personal identity, and have had a little bit of practice in sharing a story at your table, we're going to talk about how to share your story more broadly, and maybe getting outside of your comfort zone and sharing your story with somebody that you don't know or that is unfamiliar with PSW or your organization. So today we're going to talk about a little bit how to make a good story. And I apologize for some of you who are a little bit closer to graduation. It might feel like an English Lit course for like just a second. I promise we'll get over it really quickly. But I want to make sure that you know what the elements of a good story are. One of the things that we did, and Janet mentioned this in our intro, was that I did lead the board of directors through this activity last fall. And we used this booklet as a source of information, the nonprofit storytelling for board members. And I really thought that the contents of this book were much more useful to the general public. It's a really good book to describe your story and tell your story. So a lot of the themes that I'm going to be using in the next few slides really come from this workbook. So the 4 C's of storytelling, and again, this is from the workbook, so there's plenty of other things that other people have made, but this is what we're going to use today. So characters. So the characters in your story. The characters in your story should be a main character and a secondary character. And the main character should be the person or persons whose life was improved by you or your organization. So who is feeling the impact? The secondary character should be you or your organization. Connection. This is the bridge between you and your audience or your organization. When you're making that connection with somebody, you want to meet them on a personal level. Find something that resonates with them. So when you're telling a story, you want them to feel the passion that you have. You want them to know how passionate you are about the work that you're doing or the organization that you are part of. Conflict. Conflict is the thing that holds you back from achieving what you're striving for. And we're all very familiar with the internal versus external conflict. So the external conflict are the obvious barriers: the physical condition, environmental, financial, situational. The internal conflict is a little bit harder to describe: the mental health, the internal feelings, the prejudices we might have. And your story might kind of include both of those as you weave that story for your audience. The last C is conquest. Conquest, or the outcome of your main character's situation, having the problem resolved or greatly improved. You know, when I first read this book, and as I was going over this presentation with Sarah Pagankoff, she was like, "Ooh, conquest. That's an aggressive word. That's a powerful word, right?" And as I got to think about that a little bit, I was like, well, why didn't they just use the word conclusion? You know, that matches with the C's that they have. It goes along with their theme. And then I really thought about it. When you think of the word conclusion, what does that mean to you? The end, right? The end. It's a neat little ribbon that ties up that package so beautifully. And it's the end. It's off my plate. Done. Good to go. But conquest gives you the feeling that you have accomplished something great, that you have done something more than simply concluded. Conquest also leaves the door open for more, for further work on the subject. You have achieved what you've set out to do, but maybe that's not the end. A conclusion marks the end, and the conquest marks an achievement. So when telling your story, there's 2 questions I'd like you to ask yourself. Who is my audience, and what do I want my audience to think, feel, do after I talk to them? It shouldn't just be a list of all of the amazing things that you and your company do, or even if I'm talking about PSW, like PSW has resources and fast facts and conferences and legislative opportunities. What I really want you to do is focus in on one detail, one thing that you're passionate about that you can share and share with others. A good story is told to the right audience. And what I mean by that is making sure that you tailor your message to the people that you're talking to. So if you're talking to a student, you shouldn't be talking about the big L leadership and all of this amazing things. You should be talking to them about what is important to them, the transition between being a student to a professional. So really tailoring your message to who you're talking to. So with that foundational information, and the English Lit class is over, so breathe a sigh of relief. So what types of stories are there, and how do we share them? So the 3 stories that we'll be talking about today are the involvement story, your impact story, and your thank you story. And these are the 3 examples that come from this little booklet. There's so many more different types of stories, but this is what we'll focus on today. So your involvement story is your why you're involved, why you donate time, money, resources, why you're sitting in a conference chair today drinking somewhat tepid coffee. This is the part where you get to list all of the amazing things that your company does or your organization does, but make it important to you and focus in on the things that are important. So tell people why you support the organization or your position and be specific. So last fall, we asked the board of directors to do this exact same exercise. And we specifically asked them how they first got involved in PSW. And I want to read a member story from that because I thought it was so inspiring and I think it's very powerful. So I left residency anchorless. During my pharmacy education, I relished the opportunity and avenues to interact, support, and socialize with my colleagues. While I probably didn't give much thought or attention to the policy or business of the organization, it was the people, the connection that was my purpose. Entering into my career, I thought that sense of connectiveness was behind me, too immature, too unprofessional. I tried PSW shortly after study at Gunderson, but didn't really find much fulfillment, but stayed involved out of a sense of obligation and remained on the periphery. As I evolved professionally into roles which I mentored learners and eventually as RPD, I felt it was important to have them attend PSW functions because it was the right thing to do. Ryan Miller was one of my first residents. Through his experience and his lens, I started looking at PSW in a different way. I saw the connection. I saw the joy he had by being part of a community, and I saw the value. Even though he and Gretchen, following the next year, was my protege, he was teaching me. It changed my perspective. PSW was no longer an obligation. It was a place where I could find that connection that I thought was so insignificant, lost so long ago. By embracing the people part, I found that avenue for professional growth. So this person's story is really focused on the feeling of belonging and networking that PSW provides. It's specific, it evoked emotion, and it was tailored to the younger professionals or students who are really coming into that same area of their life. Moving on to our impact story. So this demonstrates the need in the community and how your organization is meeting that need. It's defining a certain type of person, a service, or an impact had by your organization. Again, this should be simple and very focused on one thing. I'm going to share with you the following story. It was shared with us. It's a little bit longer than what I'm hoping that you can do, but it was shared as a patient case, and it supports one patient through a multitude of social determinants of health barriers. So a 55-year-old African-American woman with a history of type 2 diabetes, hypertension, hyperlipidemia, and depression presented as a new patient at my pharmacy. She fled an unsafe home situation in Milwaukee and jumped on a bus, which ended up in La Crosse. After leaving everything behind, she found herself without any support in a new city. The patient was unable to read or write, had low health literacy, and was reluctant to trust healthcare professionals. She walked into the pharmacy with a social worker from the Salvation Army who identified she needed to be restarted on medication after being without them for some time. The patient was unaware of what medications she took, time of day, strength, frequency, name. The pharmacist sat down with the patient to hear her story and started building a trusting relationship. The pharmacist was still able to figure out which pharmacy the patient had used previously and transferred their prescriptions over. Determined that they would find gaps in therapy for her chronic conditions, with some likely expiring off the list, the pharmacist helped coordinate with a local provider to write prescriptions for additional necessary medications. and one of the transferred medications was a combination tablet to assist with adherence. However, this was not going to be covered by insurance. Subsequently, the pharmacist had it changed to an individual medication that could then be covered. The pharmacist identified that the patient would benefit from weekly medication bubble packing. While it normally takes multiple weeks to transition a new patient to bubble packing, the pharmacist worked to coordinate with the whole staff to urgently provide bubble packing medications for that same day. The pharmacist condensed the regimen into taking medications only twice daily. And since she could not read, the pharmacist adapted the bubble packaging to show suns and moons to represent times of day to take that medication. Through medication counseling was provided to the patient so that she was comfortable taking her medication. To address the social determinants of health barriers, pharmacists referred her to another community program and a charitable managed care organization. This helped the patient find stable housing and consistent medical follow-up. Due to transportation barriers, the pharmacy directly delivered the bubble packs to her every week. A couple of years later, the patient continues to receive weekly bubble-packed medications and has better control of her chronic conditions. This patient taught the pharmacist that their pharmacy could rise to the challenge to meet urgent patient care needs from coordinating with all staff members. It exemplified the importance of active listening and empathy with patients to build trusting relationships. As a result, the pharmacist was able to be creative with tailoring bubble packaging to meet the needs of the patient. And lastly, the case demonstrated the importance of pharmacy collaboration with the community to address social determinants of health barriers. The pharmacists here have a strong relationship with the community and provide comprehensive care for their patients. So that's a pretty powerful story about the amazing work that a pharmacy did for just one patient. And I think that really lends itself to being really down into the details of having one patient. So I'll very briefly talk about the thank you story. It's really just simply acknowledging someone else for the impact that they've had. And sometimes that acknowledgement can leave a really large impact on that person, and sometimes an unseen impact. I would highly encourage you to incorporate that into your storytelling going forward. Now, how can I share my story? And the list on the screen is very small, but there's so many different ways to share your story. Some of the ways that we've identified are bulletin boards. Put up a bulletin board at your workplace where people can share their work accomplishments, their personal accomplishments. Utilize your organization's social media page or PSW social media. I'm always happy to share something on our page. Connect with your colleagues here or beyond. Write a journal article about your organization's stories or your personal and professional growth. But what can you do today in this moment? Well, you've already shared a lot of your personal identity with those at your table during the bubble exercise. So share with them. Put your story on the session chat or on the social wall. And then we also have a Tell Your Story video booth located in the Grand Terrace today that you can come by at any time to tell your story. Our videographer, Jason, will record your story, and you can let us know if you'd like us to share it broadly on social media, or if you'd like to have this opportunity as a personal reflection. If you choose the latter option, PSW will send you your video clip for your personal use. My suggestion would be to keep this video clip and look back on it in 1 year, in 5 years, in 10 years. How has your story changed and evolved? What elements have you added to your story since today, and how far have you come? Whether this is your first conference with PSW or your 50th, I hope that this story that Karen and I have told you will impact you beyond today and inspire you to share your story with others and to listen when a story is being shared with you. You never know the impact a story might have. As you see on your table, there's a couple of stickers. I encourage you to take one, and then when you share the story of this conference with somebody else, give them another one so that they can share that story with you. So that concludes our session today. If you have questions for Karen or I, our emails are on the screen or in your app. We also have additional resources at the end of our presentation, including the nonprofit for storytelling for board members booklet that I had mentioned is at the bottom. And here's your CE code. Thank you.
Megan, that definitely did not seem like you are usually in the back of the room. You better be careful. We'll pull you up here other times. Let's give them another round of applause. I just want to take a moment of professional liberty and say a couple of things that both of these women up here have inspired me. We talked at our table about moments that we feel like a professional or those pivotal moments. I really appreciate Charlie and Becca sharing their thoughts at the microphone and being vulnerable in that. I remember in pharmacy school doing an OSCE session that we had prepared really hard for. We'd practiced and practiced. I think it was a cardiology case, something about cholesterol. We were, I got in the room, I was doing the OSCE, and I just things went off the rails. I realized halfway through that the case that we had prepared with was slightly different than the case in the room, and I was going to fail this OSCE station. Well, sure enough, I did. I failed the OSCE station. So those of you who have failed OSCE stations, life does continue. And I went into Karen's office in tears. And I thought, this is the end of my professional journey. This is not a normal thing for me to fail something. And what a great learning experience it was. But the most powerful learning experience was having a faculty member support you in that and embrace you and understand that there's life beyond that challenge. And Megan, with your inspiration with our board conversation, I gave some thought to my story. So I wanted to share a little bit of what I did after our board activity, and what I hope inspires you to share your story a little bit. So this is tailored to you as my audience. I joined the PSW staff in 2007. I was just 2 years out of school. My now husband and I had gotten engaged and were busy planning a wedding. We were living in an apartment right by PSW, and we both still had student loans. I was hungry to advance in my career and eager for learning and mentorship opportunities. I looked at pharmacy award recipients, speakers, and other leaders as individuals to emulate. In order to succeed in pharmacy leadership, I felt I needed to adopt their mannerisms, attend the meetings they attended, stay up as late as they did, hold the viewpoints they held, and work the hours that they worked. But the problem was their mannerisms, viewpoints, and approaches to networking, as mainly extroverts, were not authentic to me. It wasn't until I watched a short video talk on the power of introverts that was shared by a PSW member I was connected with on LinkedIn that I recognized the power of being authentically me. I didn't need to emulate others to be a strong leader. I needed to tap into my strengths to lead. My leadership was going to look different. By being connected with a community through PSW, I've grabbed bite-sized information from social media posts, from speakers, from hallway conversations, from email exchanges. This involvement in PSW has shaped who I am. By opening up and being vulnerable, sharing my insights, insecurities and discomforts, I am able to connect with PSW board members, other leaders, and students. I now feel that I have a story to share and that my experience growing my confidence can help others. I openly share my story. By being connected with others whose leadership styles look different, I've become more confident in my uniqueness. So I challenge you, what can you accomplish by sharing your story? Who can you inspire?